Hi everyone, welcome to this presentation. Birding is for everybody. Small ideas that can make a big difference in including and welcoming birders who are different to you. This is part 1 of 2, and if you only watch one of these presentations, this is the one you should watch. Part 2 will build on the content of this presentation and discuss programs that address inclusivity and diversity in birdwatching and is aimed more at bird clubs and other bird and conservation organisations. My name is Freya McGregor, and in the interest of being transparent, I want to share with you that I'm white, female, able-bodied, straight, and cisgender, which means I identify as the gender assigned to me at birth. I've been a birder basically my whole life, and I'm also Australian, so that explains that accent. But I fell in love with the charming American soldier and have been living in the US for the last 4.5 years, which has been great for my birding. I'm also an occupational therapist. Occupational therapy is a healthcare profession which aims to enable participation in any activity that is meaningful to a person. This person, often due to illness, injury, or disability, is unable to participate as effectively or as independently as they would like. So occupational therapists use their knowledge and skills to try and break down barriers so the person can engage in whatever activity they want to that brings them meaning. We can do this in 3 main ways: by using adaptive equipment, by teaching new skills to that person or to others around them, and by modifying the physical, social, or cultural environment. In this case, the activity or occupation that brings meaning is birdwatching, right? And the people I'm talking about include birders who have a disability, birders who are Black, Indigenous, and people of colour, and birders who identify as LGBTQIA+. Now, as I mentioned, I do not fall into any of these 3 categories of birdwatcher, so I don't have any real lived experience of what it's like. I'm certainly not trying to speak over any birder who does have this lived experience. Instead, I'm trying to amplify what they've said so that more people hear it. As an occupational therapist, I am trained in identifying barriers and thinking outside the box of ways to get around them. And one of these ways is to gather other people's lived experiences and share them so that we may all learn something new and thus modify the social and cultural environment. Many of the ideas in this presentation came from other people, and I've referenced them when able, and a few I've observed myself. So this is beginning to change, but for a lot of people, when they think of what a, quote, classic birdwatcher looks like, they think of someone who looks a bit like these people. They're middle-aged or retirement-aged. They're able-bodied, as against someone with a disability. They're white or white-passing, and they have a disposable income. After all, optics aren't cheap. And there's nothing wrong with fitting this description. In fact, these 2 classic birders are my lovely mum and dad. But not everyone gets to go birding so easily. I know for me, I don't have to think too much about if that organised bird walk is in a neighbourhood I would feel comfortable or safe in. And I don't have to consider how I'm going to find out if the trail is one I'll actually be able to navigate on my own. And apart from some occasional minor disrespect, which I've attributed to being young, female birder with a funny accent, generally, I feel pretty comfortable in my own skin while out on a trail on my own or with a group. But not everyone is this lucky. And I think that's not good, because birdwatching is awesome. You get to connect with nature, go on never-ending treasure hunts, learn, explore, sometimes travel to some amazing places. Well, I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. But not everyone gets to have such a great time doing this. So let's put on our occupational therapy hats and see what we can do to break down some barriers and teach new skills to us and modify the social and cultural environment of birdwatching so that everybody who wants to can enjoy it. After all, define a birdwatcher. It's someone who gets enjoyment out of observing birds, right? You don't have to know all their names or recognise their calls or own a pair of binoculars to be a birdwatcher. And what is bird watching. It doesn't have to be a walk, right? Sitting in a bird hide is still bird watching. It doesn't have to take all day. Spending 10 minutes watching the feeders at a nature centre still counts. You don't have to have spent $2,000 or more on the latest optics to appreciate the beauty of that red-headed woodpecker or a common loon. So, don't be a birder snob. Jason Ward was one of the organisers of Black Birders Week. During one of the Birding While Black panel discussions, he said, "It's about time to get that conversation started, because at the end of the day, birding is for every single person, and we should all feel comfortable doing it." I couldn't agree more. It may be easy to wonder why you should care about this. Well, what do you love about birdwatching? Don't you think that everybody should get the chance to enjoy this wonderful hobby too? In fact, if you've never had to consider this, that shows how lucky, how privileged you are. And that's great that you haven't had to. But so many of our fellow birdwatchers do not have this same privilege, and there's some quick, easy things we can do to help them out. Also, just because you're able-bodied now doesn't mean you will always be. If we're working to make birding more inclusive and accessible to people with all kinds of disabilities, you yourself or someone you love may reap the rewards in the future. After all, everyone gets older, and perhaps your wife will have a hip replacement and will have some mobility difficulties as a result, but she still wants to go birdwatching with you. It's not just the domain of older folks either. Last summer, I was quite suddenly unable to straighten my right knee for months and unable to walk more than a mile or so, but I still wanted to get out in nature and go birding. So if we work to make sure birding sites and bird walks are physically accessible, you might be the very person who benefits from it later. Tyche James works at National Audubon and was the moderator of the Birding While Black panels during Black Birders Week. As he pointed out, racism is a direct threat to environmental progress. The more people we can engage and inspire to care about birds, and thus, hopefully, nature, the more people who may raise their voices and help make a bigger impact in conservation and looking after this planet. Why wouldn't we want to do what we can to support that? So, birders with mobility impairments might be birders who use a wheelchair. And by the way, many people who use a wheelchair can walk, but due to an injury or a disability or medical condition that causes chronic pain or fatigue, they may find it easier or generally more beneficial to use a wheelchair, just so you know. They might be birders who use a mobility aid, like a walking frame or crutches. They might have lower limb injuries, permanently or temporarily, like me and my dodgy knee last summer. Or they might have a chronic condition that impacts their ability to walk fast, or to walk for long distances, and so on. Perhaps they have a condition like multiple sclerosis, chronic fatigue, lupus, or fibromyalgia. You may be also inviting any disabled military veterans without necessarily realising it or attending to. And anything we can do to thank these folks for their service and make them feel welcome is surely a good thing. These birders have extra things to consider when they want to go birding. Things like, what is the trail like? Does it have a paved surface? Are there tree roots on the trail? Does it have potholes? Does it have benches so I can have a bit of a sit if I need to have a rest along the way? How steep is it? Is there a cross slope along the trail? Is it wide enough that I could pass someone in my wheelchair? And can I even get to the trail? Is there enough parking at the trailhead so I won't have to spend all of my energy just walking to the trailhead from a mile away? Are there handicap parking spaces, those with the diagonal lines blocking out a big rectangle next to the parking space, so I can actually get out of my car? Are there gates, posts, narrow bridges, or other physical barriers before the trail even starts? And if I go, will I be welcome? Before they go birding, Black, Indigenous, and people of colour or BIPOC, and lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, and asexual birders, or LGBTQIA+, may have to consider things like, is that birdwalk in an area that's safe for me to visit? Is it a historically overtly racist or homophobic area? Are there any Confederate flags nearby or along the drive there? As Tyke James said, the history of birding areas we go can define our experiences there, or at least define our perspective there. And Alex Troutman, another organiser of Black Birders Week, suggested, think, if I was black, would I go out there with a small group of people knowing an altercation could occur? Not only might BIPOC or LGBTQIA+ birders not feel comfortable going on that birdwalk or chasing a rarity in that area, they might not feel comfortable telling their white or straight friends that this is the reason that they don't want to go. So we have to keep this in mind too. Another thing they may have to consider is having to continually prove that they belong there. They might do this by wearing t-shirts and other things with birds on them, or holding their binoculars really obviously so that other trail users and even police officers can see that they're there just to go bird watching. And certainly, will I be welcome? So, what can you do, just yourself, as an individual birder out on the trail or as a member of a birdwalk? Let's start with what you shouldn't do. Don't make it weird. Don't be super exaggeratedly welcoming or excited that there's finally a black birder on this walk. That makes it weird. Don't do that. Don't look someone up and down, scanning to see if they're wearing binoculars. Remember, don't be a bird snob or looking at their prosthetic leg. No one likes to be looked up and down. Don't mix them up with the other black, disabled, or LGBTQIA+ birder. How would you like to be confused with the other grey-haired birder or the other birder from Kentucky? It doesn't feel so nice, right? After all, you're your own person. Don't comment on what makes them different to you. General consensus is to ignore that difference unless either they bring it up or it needs to be discussed. For example, if they are a wheelchair user and you're the leader of a bird walk and you legitimately aren't sure if their wheelchair will be able to navigate some of the trail, then just ask them. And by the way, that birder knows they're a wheelchair user, so go ahead and ask like it's a normal question. You don't have to be awkward and secretive about it. While we're on wheelchairs, don't touch someone's wheelchair without their permission. It's part of their personal space, and it would be weird and not cool if someone just walked up to you and started touching your legs. If there's a steep section or a bump, offer to help. But if they say no, respect their answer and leave it at that. Plenty of people can do more than you might think and might want to be left alone to do it themselves. So never assume someone needs help without asking them first. Don't ask, where are you from? That can be such a loaded, tricky question to answer. And as an Australian living in the US, trust me, it can get tiresome to answer as well. I'm just here to go birding, not give you a geography lesson. And don't ask, how long have you been birding? That can really sound like you're implying they're new and thus inexperienced and lacking in knowledge. It also isn't a very effective way of gauging how, quote, good a birder they are. Plenty of people have been birdwatching for decades but haven't taken the time to learn more than the breeding plumage of the backyard feeder birds at their house. And plenty of people may have only been birdwatching for a couple of years, but have spent every spare minute out on trails finding birds, listening to their calls, reading about their biology and natural history. But if you assume ignorance when someone says, oh, only a couple of years, you'll probably be judging them unfairly and missing out on a chance to learn from them. Remember, don't be a bird snob. Now you know what to avoid doing. What should you make a point of doing? Smile at everyone and anyone. That has to be the easiest way to help people feel welcome and at ease. Assume people are here to go birdwatching too, whether they have binoculars or not. Not everyone can afford the expensive optics. They may really wish they owned a pair, but they don't. Some people, my husband included, really dislike using binoculars. He chooses instead to act as my spotter. With his sharp eyes and wider field of view, he's invaluable in spotting birds for me. And then, beginner birders may not yet know if they want to invest in binoculars. Chances are, when you first started birdwatching, you didn't right away have your own optics, but that doesn't mean you weren't interested. Ask non-judgmental questions like, have you seen any cool birds today? Okay, so this is passing some judgment on the coolness of the bird, but not on the person you're asking. Another organiser of Black Birders Week, Corinna Newsom, advised, if they're excited, even if it's something you've seen 1,000 times before, match their excitement. Yes. Right now, during COVID-19, this isn't recommended, but one day, let other birders and passers-by look in your scope. You might spark something. If you don't own a scope, it can feel so exciting to see birds so close up, and with random passers-by, you never know what your small act of kindness might start. Hopefully, a lifelong love of birdwatching. If you see someone being racist, homophobic, or ableist, speak up and call it out. In a bird club meeting, during a bird walk, or just randomly on your walk through a park. Don't be silent and pretend you didn't hear it, because silence is still a decision. And don't just leave it to the black person or the wheelchair user in the room to advocate and do the work all the time. That can be exhausting and very lonely. Stand up with them and use your influence to help. And keep listening and learning. Engage in anti-racism education. Examine your biases. Reflect and then act. And if someone corrects you, don't feel awful and just give up. Thank them for their feedback and try again. If you lead bird walks, there's a few extra things you can do to help make all birders feel welcome on your bird walks. The most important of these, something I've seen mentioned again and again by all three of these populations, is to include some kind of formal welcome statement at the beginning of your walk. While it can be easy to think, well, of course everyone is welcome, why wouldn't they be? It's a very different thing to directly and intentionally express this welcome and can make a huge difference to someone's feeling of comfort on this walk. On purpose, going out of your way to acknowledge all kinds of birders can be incredibly powerful and may be the difference between someone feeling like they'd be welcome back again or not feeling like they want to go on a bird walk ever again. This also sets the social etiquette for the walk and can make other participants more aware of their behaviour. If this is the one thing you remember from this presentation, I will feel like I have succeeded. I first observed such a welcome statement at the beginning of a bird walk run by Carla Noboa of the Boston chapter of the Feminist Bird Club, and I was amazed at how much everyone seemed to just immediately relax. This walk was set up for people who often may not feel super welcome or comfortable on more sort of traditional bird walks. Birdwatchers who are female, BIPOC, or LGBT, as well as beginner birders, and the welcome statement seemed to make everyone just feel at ease. It was almost a collective sigh of, oh, phew, I'm in the right place, and everyone here is okay with me being here. I can take down my guard and relax. And wow, it was really powerful. As the leader, it's easy to wear a name tag with clear, dark font on a light background for maximum readability. That means, for people like me, who are terrible at remembering names, I actually have a chance of remembering yours. and so will likely feel more comfortable asking you questions. And I'll remember what the name is of the wonderful leader whose walk I went on. Right after your welcome statement, you can also get everyone to go around in a circle and say their names and their preferred pronouns. I know for me, even though I will almost certainly forget your name the first time you tell me, the fact that you've told me your name makes me feel so much more comfortable asking you questions or for ID help. This little thing can make everyone feel much more friendly with each other. And preferred pronouns are like him and he or she and her. Sometimes someone's name or face doesn't automatically tell you the gender a person identifies with, and it's so awkward for everyone when you say he when really they are a she. Inviting participants, again, this is intentional, to share their preferred pronouns takes 2 seconds, but signals to any transgender or non-binary folks that they're welcome on your walk too. All it takes is for participants to say, "Hi, I'm Freya and my preferred pronouns are she, her and hers." It's too easy. As a leader of birdwalks, it is your responsibility to be aware of overt racism in any areas you may want to hold your birdwalks, and perhaps reconsider that as a location. If you want to attract all kinds of birders, make sure you're running all kinds of birdwalks. Hold birdwalks on accessible trails regularly, and you never know how many more birders may join in. It's like backyard bird feeding. You don't wait until the downy woodpecker shows up in your yard before you put the suet cake out, right? You put the suet cake out in the hopes the downy woodpecker might one day show up. And be consistent. Sometimes it can take days, weeks, or months before word gets out that your bird club holds monthly bird walks on ADA-compliant nature trails. And while you're waiting to see if your experiment worked, it's not like other birders won't be seeing birds along the trail anyway, so it doesn't hurt to hold an all-persons bird walk once a month. Believe someone when they spot a bird or ID it. It can feel very discouraging and dismissive to have your ID ignored or questioned, and it's just a small attitude adjustment to instead trust but verify. This can be the difference between a birdwalk leader being encouraging and being discouraging. Regardless of someone's skin colour, physical ability, age, gender, or sexual orientation, believe them. They might be wrong, but you can point that out as well, kindly. And if you're one of the participants of the walk and you hear that person make a call, but everyone else is ignoring it, publicise their call. But don't pretend like you made that call. Oh, that's so frustrating when that happens, and it certainly isn't a way to make friends with the person who saw it first. Take into account someone's disability during the walk and offer to help or for a modification, like taking the shorter, flatter route back. But don't force your help or assume they need it. This is most respectfully done quietly, directly with that person, so they will hopefully feel more comfortable giving you an honest answer. And advocate for participants who might need to come to the front of the group to see a bird, for example, because they're seated in their wheelchair and can't see over a bunch of people standing, or for participants who might need to sit down to regain some energy or give an injury a rest. That could be as easy as saying something like, "Instead of stopping here for a drink break, let's move over to that bench so that anyone who needs to can have a rest for a couple of minutes." Speaking as someone with an injured knee, trust me, that can be so appreciated. Bird clubs have a lot of things they can do too to help make their club and their meeting feel more welcoming and inclusive of all kinds of birders. Make sure your meeting venue is in an ADA compliant venue, and make sure you state this on your website. By the way, ADA stands for Americans with Disabilities Act and defines, among other things, physical accessibility requirements of new public buildings. If you do not overtly state this online, I would assume your meeting venue is not accessible, and I wouldn't necessarily email you to find out. I would just never come. Take the onus off this group of people and make it as easy as possible for them to come to you. On your website, if the wheelchair entrance is different to the most used entrance, make sure you include directions to it too. And when you arrive at the meeting venue, make sure that the wheelchair entrance is unlocked and any necessary lights are on. There is nothing that says, "You don't matter to us and we really don't care if you come or not," like a literal locked door. Write up an inclusion and diversity statement for your organisation and include it on your website and in your newsletter. Again, like the intentional welcome statement at the start of a bird walk, this may seem like something that doesn't really need to be said, but it can make a world of difference to someone who isn't feeling confident that they would be welcome if they did attend. In this statement, address race, homophobia, and ableism in birding and what your organisation will do about it moving forward. I have linked a few examples of these for you to check out on the resources website. More on that later. And use this statement to hold yourselves accountable. This is the act part. Promote and host events that highlight and celebrate birders of all kinds, like Let's Go Birding Together walks, which are held in June for Pride Month. These walks were started by one staff member at Spring Creek Prairie Audubon Centre in Nebraska, reaching out to the local Pride network and explicitly inviting LGBTQIA+ folks on a bird walk. It's as easy and as intentionally exclusive as that. Review your list of guest presenters. Is it diverse? Sometimes this can be legitimately hard to break out of that classic birder mold, but can you impact this? Like any kind of change, it's easy to just keep doing things the way you've always done it, and it takes effort to go out of your way to find more diverse presenters. But it's worth it. Invite BIPOC birders, LGBTQIA+ birders, or birders with a disability to present on a topic they're experts on, rather than about race, inclusivity, or birding with a disability, as this emotional labour can be exhausting, unless they want to talk about it. Speaking of this emotional labour, the toll this can take of having to continuously educate fellow birders can be really tiring. Don't expect these members to do it for themselves all the time. Stand up alongside them and advocate too. But certainly don't speak over them. Nobody likes that. If a conversation arises about a member's lived experience of birding while black with a disability or as an LGBTQIA+ birder, don't try to shut it down or label it as political. They're not trying to make you vote for something. They're sharing something with you about something they've experienced while trying to enjoy a mutual hobby. Another straight down the line quote from the Birding While Black panel discussion from Corinna Newsom. Neutrality is not an option, or you will be part of the systemic exclusion and racism. Instead of trying to brush it under the rug, ask instead what can be done to fix the problem. And do it if you can. Run free bird walks in neighbourhoods and areas that are typically underserved. You might be amazed at the birds you find there. Again, be consistent about it, and if you have a birdwalk leader who grew up in that area, invite them to lead it. If it's a Spanish-speaking area, you'll have an even greater impact if you can run these walks in Spanish. And by the way, there are plenty of wonderful Spanish-speaking birders. This is part 1 of this series, and in part 2 of this presentation, I've got a few great programs and resources to share with you that are welcoming, accessible, and inclusive. Part 2 is more aimed at bird clubs and Audubon chapters, so I encourage you to check it out to get some ideas to bring back to your organisations and apply them to your programs and bird walks. Wow, that was a lot. It's okay if you're feeling a little overwhelmed with all this information. If you'd like to learn more about what it can be like as a birder with a disability, who is BIPOC or LGBTQIA+, there are a lot of places to start looking. The first place is the accompanying resources page I created for this presentation. It's on the Ray Brown's Talkin' Birds website. Instead of making a downloadable PDF for you, I did it this way so that as I learn about more resources, I can add them and you can click straight through to the places that I mention. The web address is talkinbirds, no G in talkin, .com/ideas-for-welcoming-and-inclusive-birders. But here are the final take-home messages which can apply to all three of these groups of birders. Birders with disabilities, BIPOC birders, and birders who are LGBTQIA+. Be intentional in being inclusive and welcoming. Don't just assume that people should just know that they're welcome. Believe someone if they tell you it's not safe for them to attend a bird walk or not possible due to accessibility pitfalls. Fix this or modify the best you can for next time and invite their suggestions too. Frequently, say at least once a year, and genuinely ask for input from all birders. You can do this easily and anonymously using a Google form online. Learn, reflect, and act. And be humble if you were corrected. We all make mistakes, and that's okay. Apologize and try again. One of my favourite quotes about inclusivity and diversity in birding comes from Dr. J. Drew Lanham. He said, "It's amazing how much brighter plumage looks when you can be comfortable and not have to have one eye in the binoculars and one eye over your back." I hope you've learnt something today about small but powerful ways we can all help make birdwatching more welcoming and inclusive for birders of all kinds. I'd love to hear from you, so please send me an email if you've got any questions, comments, feedback, or know of any other resources that might help others. Don't forget, part 2 of this presentation is about specific examples of programs that are already in place that are inclusive and welcoming, and I hope you'll come back and join me as we explore these programs and why they're important. Until then, let's go birding together!